Welcome to the Product Management Insights, where we dive into the strategies and innovations that are shaping the SaaS industry from the perspective of a product leader. I'm your host, Chuck Akins, and today we have Janna Bastow, co-founder and CEO of ProdPad and other things, joining us. She's a pioneer in the industry and first known for developing the Now, Next, Later roadmap methodology. And is the driving force behind Mind the Product, a community of over 300,000 product managers. With this type of background and exposure, she has incredible insights into the challenges and opportunities that are facing product leaders today. So welcome to the show.
Wonderful. Hey, thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Let's start with the incredible community inside of Mind the Product, which just seems to be growing. You have over 200 product tank meetups worldwide. What has been the key to this growth and just appeal that you're seeing out there in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we started Mind the Product, it wasn't because we thought we knew everything. It was because we wanted to learn from other product managers. We discovered that was actually a common thread. Product people wanted to learn from other product people and surround themselves with other product people who knew what it was like and could share those experiences and, could further their selves in the craft by finding other people who were doing the same sort of thing. And, that was, what was at the heart of it. And one of the really key things for success was just consistency. We were running this thing, the product tank meetups on a monthly basis, just every month being there. And every month we might get, an extra 10 people turning up and an extra 10 and an extra 10 until the room was bursting. And then the wait list was bursting. And before you knew it, it was just obvious to turn it into a conference, which then turned into multi-city, and, the product tanks turned into, cities around the world and became this thing that was much, much bigger than we could have imagined when we started it.
Yeah, what a great story. And as things take off, you mentioned something in there in the beginning. How did you ensure consistency so that the community got value out of the time and the shares that they experience with other people? How do you keep that under reins?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was just hard graft. We split the load. There were a few of us involved in the early days, and we would share different tasks. But I mean, some of it was just making sure that someone was there to open the doors, and someone was there to intercept the delivery of ice and drinks for the evening. Right, someone was there to make sure that the AV person was let in, and that everything was set up for the day. Some of it was just on the ground, do it. But then also when it came to, curating and finding good people, one of the unlocks was finding people within the community to help curate. And this kind of grew organically because somebody from the audience came to us at one point in time and said, hey, would love to see a product tank on this sort of topic. And that was Mark Abraham. And Mark Abraham was given the opportunity saying, well, instead of us, finding speakers on this, do you want to guest curate? And so he guest curated. But then what we sort of realized was we could give him this opportunity to guest curate, but then show other people how to guest curate. And long story short, he ended up becoming the product tank coordinator globally, and showing other product tanks how to scale their guest curation and their operations and, that sort of thing. But it started by actually working with people in the community to, reach out to product people and product leaders and people who might want to come in and speak and, help out with the sort of reach of and scale of product tanks.
Mm-hmm. So with all of this collaboration, curation, like you mentioned the conference earlier, you have this unique perspective of being able to interact and intake from so many leaders in the industry, so many product managers, so many product leaders. What are a few trends or topics that you are seeing as you're able to experience and hear from these different product tanks, or put the conference together, or curate? What are the most interesting trends and topics in the space right now for you?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, I think it changes over the years, right? I mean, I remember when we first started, the conversation was around what is a product manager, and am I a product manager, and how do we find our feet, and how do we make our space for ourselves and differentiate ourselves, and make sure people understand what it is that we do. And then it became things like, well, how do we get permission for doing the things that make an impact, right? How do we make sure that we're not just seen as Gantt chart jockeys, right? Making specs and just trying to get things out the door and creating feature factories. How do we make space so we can spend time in discovery and, building our teams out in the right way? How do we build psychological safety? And there became this whole trend around moving up in the right track for you, right? How do you become the not just a great product manager, but a great product manager leader? And how do you create space for your team to do the great work as well? And now there's a lot of talk around what's the future of product management, right? We had this whole, bubbling up of product managers coming in from all different angles. And then we saw a tech crash of sorts, right? We saw some really difficult times where a lot of people, not just product people, lost jobs. There were a lot of reductions. And people have been looking and trying to figure out what that means for their roles. And we've seen this introduction of AI as well. And AI can do some of the stuff that, frankly, I was doing as a product manager years ago when I was a much more junior role. So what does it mean to be a product manager? And so the conversations now are talking about, well, what's the future of product management? And how do we make sure that we're still adding value to the companies that we're working for? And my belief is that there's still tons of value that a product manager can add to their team and add to the company that they're working for. There's great conversations happening around this and great things that are in flow in this space. I think the future is still to be written in this area.
Let's unpack that a little bit. What kind of value? We can go back to feature factory and problem cases and those kind of things, those fundamental, what is a product manager, product leader, and what do they do? But let's look at today. What are some different ways, maybe not traditional ways, but different ways that a product manager can bring value and create impact for an organization?
Yeah, so I think one of the really key things is making sure that product is tied really closely to what the value for the business is requiring, right? So I think there's historically been a disconnect between product and the business, right? I think a lot of times, or certainly back in my cohort of product people when we were starting, the product manager's job was very closely tied to what the development team was doing, right? And so your job was to talk to the customers and then come up with features and make sure those features got out the door. And there were a lot of product managers whose job it was just to, work really closely with the sprint planning and getting work out the door and that sort of thing, right? And those days are long gone, and it sort of created a bad name for product people. That's where the feature factory and the build trap kind of concepts came from. I think a lot of companies are still getting themselves out of that habit and trying to reconcile good product management with how it can make an impact on the business, which is product management should be tied to getting those outcomes for the business itself. So you're not just building things for the customers. You're building things for the customers because those customers, if pleased, will pay money, which adds value to the business's bottom line, right? And so ultimately, you're trying to solve problems for the business. And product managers are trying to find that thread of, here's what the business needs, here's what we should be working on. And by way of doing this, we're going to be solving customer problems, because pretty much every business would be remiss not to be solving customer problems, right? Unless you're a monopoly, of course, then you don't have to worry about it. But most of us are not, right? So you've got to focus on solving these customer problems, which then brings that value into the business, which then should be tied back up to what the business actually needs. But you see this coming out in really weird ways. Like all of a sudden companies are trying to hire growth product managers. And growth product manager is a really weird name because I mean, weren't the companies trying to grow in the first place? Weren't product managers trying to help the company grow in the first place? Or are they just trying to slap on the word growth in the hopes that the product manager now just focuses on growth as a core company metric? And I think that's what's really happening, is that they're just hoping that if they sort of label the product manager as growth and tell them it's growth stuff you should be working on, then that's what they're going to do. And maybe that'll actually work if they make sure that the product manager is working on growth focused stuff, if that's what's important to the business. But really, if you think about it, if that's what's important to the business, you don't have to label the product manager a growth product manager. They're still a product manager. The product manager, regardless of whether they're a growth product manager or just a product manager, should be listening to what the business needs and working towards that. And if that's growth that the business needs, then that's what the product manager works towards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting observation, because there are growth marketers. It's the same kind of thing, wasn't that right? And then but I've never heard or came across a growth sales manager title, right? Like that's right. So, but I make fun about growth marketing and mention growth sales. This historical alignment to product development, I don't want to say it was glorified project management, but it was feature factory. If that was your job, was to prioritize and be a little bit more thoughtful than just getting the projects done. I'm assuming that in a growth scenario, you're more aligned with sales and marketing. What kind of things do you see showing up for a product leader or a product manager as they have to make, or they need to make this shift towards a sales and marketing conversation, or even sitting in the middle between product development and, let's just say, sales?
Yeah. Well, it's not even that you're more aligned with sales and marketing. It's so backing up as to why the work was very aligned with development in the first place, is that's where product kind of spent its time for a while, right? Product was reporting, before there were CPOs, there were CTOs, and product kind of reported into those, right? And so you were measured by the same thing that developers were, right? How many features could you get out the door? And by features, we mean story points, or, number of lines of code shipped, or whatever sort of old metric you were measured by, right? It was very much an output focused type of measurement, very project type of measurement. And so that's where product kind of grew up, or certainly spent some formative years, from the 90s to early noughties. And that pervased how we worked for some time. But it's not necessarily that product managers need to be more sales and marketing focused now. It's actually that they need to be more business focused, right? So they need to be listening to what the goals of the business are, and then orchestrating that across the different business units. And so sometimes that's solving problems that are technical. Sometimes it's solving problems that are, coming out of what the sales team is asking for. Sometimes it's solving problems that are product marketing focused, right? So they're about, driving up conversion rates from your free trial so more people can get in, right? It's actually kind of division or functional area agnostic, because it's not about which area of the team you're focusing on or working most closely with. It's about the problems that you're solving, and what you're solving for is you're solving to make the business more successful. And that's how it always should have been. But I think we kind of lost our way, or never really made that connection in such a tangible way. But it's becoming more apparent and more of a competitive advantage for product managers who make that connection. I find that product people can talk about user features and customer delight and, jobs to be done for their customers and, their peers, their stakeholders, until the cows come home. They've got that nailed. That's what a lot of the conversations, I've listened to a lot of product management conversations. I've been to a lot of product tanks. I've seen all the talks, and that's what people talk about day in, day out. We've got that nailed. But stakeholder management, managing up and understanding the needs of our business stakeholders and what their needs are, how they're incentivized, how to talk in a financially literate way, in terms of, how the business runs, that tends to be a weak point that often makes product managers kind of shake in their boots when they're told, okay, great, go figure out exactly what your board needs, what makes your CEO tick, how are their bonuses running, what are their incentives, and how are they aligned or misaligned with what you're building? Because oftentimes where you're feeling tensions, why they're asking for things like a date on something or why they want a particular thing done in a particular way, those tensions exist because there's some sort of misalignment between what you think needs to be done for the technical side or marketing or sales or whatever, and what they think needs to be done based on what they see from their point of view.
No, that's a great point. And when it comes to the objectives of a business, I think I heard you mention earlier, it's growth, it's revenue, it's money. I mean, that is always going to be one of your KPIs or OKRs is going to be growth and revenue.
In pretty much most, if not all, revenue, for-profit businesses, right? Yes. Those are kind of key ones that you could say, yep, that's probably important to you. Yes.
So let's dive into that intersection just for a second of, just this space of revenue, money, growth, dollars, because that is 100% of the time going to be on the mind of the CEO. Or the board is going to be that side of it. And we already have the customer delight and the feature fact. We got all that. We've got that down.
Yeah.
How would someone who is trying to develop this part of their talent stack, the sales marketing board, running the business, right? Because that's a different mindset.
Yeah.
What are a couple areas that they would start? I mean, you mentioned trial conversions, usually product leaders. There's pricing and licensing conversations, but where would you start? 1, 2, 3, just in trying to think about how you could affect and impact as a product leader the objectives of the business.
So I would start with discovery. Just like if you were entering a business and you were, a product manager coming from, one industry to a completely new industry, it might be kind of terrifying, but you'd get over it because you'd have access to your users and you would talk to them. You'd do discovery and you'd learn what you need to know about the problems that they have. Well, the same is true of your execs or any other stakeholders that you don't understand. Is you go do discovery. You understand what their needs are. You go talk to them and you interview them. You say to them going, hey, well, how do you measure success? What are your measurements? What sort of things do you look at? What does good look like? What are your guardrails? What does, bad look like? Get an understanding as to what sort of figures and numbers and facts and other things that keep them awake at night. And you'll learn a ton about the business. So if you're in a SaaS business, then, maybe you'll learn a whole bunch of new SaaS metrics. If you're in an e-commerce business, there's a whole bunch of other things that you'll learn, right? Just completely different depending on the type of business that you're in, the context, the stage, whether you're a public company, whether you've got a huge board, a little board, a sole founder that's just getting started, or, a complicated exec structure, whatever it is. Go talk to whoever it is who's running this thing and figure out what is important to the business, what keeps them up, and what incentives they have, right? Because then you can learn what is important to the business and how that's driving things, or how that might influence things that are coming up on, or that you aspire to, and how that translates to your product strategy, right? And they'll probably have a sense as to, they should have a clear sense as to what the company strategy is, and should be able to translate why that has driven the product strategy. And there often is, what you'll do in this part of this discovery is realize that there's been a disconnect between your product strategy or what you thought you were supposed to be doing and what the company strategy is, right? And this becomes a whole thing. And then you realize, wait, this whole product that I was going to build was going to fail your expectations. Like the customers would have loved it. But if you were planning on us being this because you wanted to get us to here, because you wanted to IPO or put us in a sellable position, or, you wanted to cozy up next to that strategic, or, whatever it is that they had in mind. And you were going in this direction because you wanted to cozy up next to these customer segments. You would be building the wrong things. You need to understand the company strategy and the bigger picture and how it's going to be measured. And then you can make your product strategy align with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's stop there just for a second. Not stop, but pause for a minute. In the SaaS world, let's go to that space if we can. As I ask this question, if I've done the discovery and I had a misaligned product strategy, because that's fairly common. When I put a marketing strategy together, if I did it in a vacuum, it may not be the right call. How now does your framework, the now, next, later, potentially help this alignment? What is your thought? And what is your thought process? What is the approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the thing, regardless of whether you're thinking now, next, later, or whatever you want to label this thing, right? Think of your roadmap as being a prototype for your strategy, right? Think of your roadmap as I said, a prototype. And it sort of frees you from making the perfect roadmap. Because when you're doing a prototype, as a designer or as a non-designer even, right? When you have a new idea that you want to work on, a new feature that you've got, a basic idea for, you don't go and start coding away, or you don't go tell a developer, go code it like this, and then, expect this beautiful version to come out and solve the problem exactly as you hoped it would, because what they're going to build, or what you're going to build, is going to be probably junk and not solve the problem in the ideal way. What you'd do is you'd start with a piece of paper and you'd prototype it out. And then you'd take that piece of paper and you'd show it to people and you'd get feedback on it. And somebody would say, oh, cool. I can kind of see the concept here. Thanks for drawing it out. But what about, a bit of copy here, or changing that button, or what does this mean? Mm-hmm. And you go, oh yeah, good feedback. And so you'd throw out the prototype and you'd create a new one with their feedback incorporated. And then you'd do that again and again and again with different potential end users. Well, road mapping should be similar, but instead of your feature level, you're doing this at the strategic level, where you're saying, well, I think we're going this direction. And you've got this information from, your initial first guesses based on conversations you've had and what you think your strategy is. Don't overthink it. Just put down, I think we're going here, then here, then here. Problem 1, 2, 3, now, next, later. It's not your final roadmap. It's a prototype, and you're going to take it to people and they're going to be like, cool. I see where you're going, but what about this? And then they point out, well, what about problem X, and what about problem Y, and what about problem Z? And, I don't see problem B being a problem because, we've solved that with AI. Cool. You can take that off, right? So you reshuffle your roadmap, you add things, you take things away, you change your strategy. And again, it's just a prototype. You're not moving forward on this stuff. You're just changing it based on feedback from important stakeholders. So this is stuff that you're showing to team members, to your board, your bosses, to other people who are in the know about, the context that you operate in, and who your competitors are, and where you're going, and what your company strategy is, and what's on the marketing strategy, and everything else. And as you go, you're throwing out the old versions of the roadmap, or you're iterating on the roadmap, and you're getting a stronger and stronger version of your strategy every time you iterate. So instead of the weak version that you came up with to start with, which is often where a lot of product managers stop, they come up with a version in their head and they put it down and they go, roadmap, good to go.
Check mark.
Yeah, ship it. And then are surprised when they don't add value at the end of the year. What this way of thinking is, it solidifies it, right? It strengthens it by getting the inputs of lots of other people in the company to look at it and sense check it. What it also does as a bonus is that it takes away any surprises. The worst thing is when you share a roadmap, in some sort of team meeting or something like that, you share the roadmap and people go, that's not what I thought you were going to do, right? When in fact, if you've done this exercise, when you share the roadmap, everyone's kind of gone, Yeah, I've
Oh,
totally
yeah.
seen this, right? This is just a slight update on the last one. I can see you've tweaked that, but you made room for that. Otherwise, yeah, the stuff that we talked about is totally in there, and this all makes sense. This is the same story we've been talking to ourselves about, and this is a good, strong roadmap that we've seen built up over the last few weeks of this road mapping process. And that's the really key thing, is that the value is not the roadmap, right? I don't care whether it's a now, next, later roadmap or whatever you call it, right? The value is in the road mapping process, the process in which you take the stuff that you put in the now, next, later and shared it with people and were willing to throw it out and restart it or change stuff and iterate on it over time. And that's really what we did with ProdPad. It wasn't the fact that you had the now, next, later at the top. It was the fact that it was a really flexible space to be able to show it to people, collaborate on it, and change it really quickly without people getting really tied up in the fact that, ooh, well, you previously said that this was going to be done in June and now it's in August, and what have I lost here? It's like, no, it's more about how far away these things are from us. And really, this is all just sort of a prototype for our strategy right now. Let's solidify it together.
So no, that's discovery, communication, collaboration, iteration, all that really makes sense to me. What about data, our market research, or maybe how do you factor that into prioritizing and communicating or making decisions about the strategy being not right or wrong? It's not that binary, but to know which direction to go.
Yeah,
Where does data fit in?
Data is just another input, right? So when you are having these conversations with people, there are going to be people who have access to data, and the person who comes to you with data versus their opinion is going to have a stronger take on it, right? So if you say, hey, here's my roadmap, and somebody says, I don't like it. Okay. But somebody else says, I don't like it, and here's some data. Cool. Okay. Well, let's see which direction it's going to go, right? So data strengthens or weakens your position and, helps back up which direction you're going to go with in things, or, can strengthen your position for saying, this is why I think we do go this direction. Mm-hmm. But certainly what's on your roadmap shouldn't be driven purely by data. I don't believe in being data driven, but by being data informed. But really what your roadmap should be driven by is, well, is it solving the right problems that are tied to the objectives that your company is trying to solve for, right? So taking a step back, what are the areas that your business needs to consider solving for, right? Is it that you're aiming to get, revenue? And by revenue, I mean, are there specific measures that you're looking to tackle? Is it that you're trying to tackle market share? Are you an early stage, or are you a later stage that's defending a space, right? You've got to consider your context and then map out the problems to do with that, and then use data and qualitative and quantitative bits of information to back up what goes onto that roadmap, and helps strengthen as to whether you're on the right track or not.
If I did want to be more data informed as a product manager, and I want to be aligned with the business goals, what kind of data points or what kind of data would I be trying to obtain to validate strategy or to iterate strategy? What are some maybe more innovative points of data that I might want to look for?
I mean, that's too big of a question, because it depends on the product that you're in, right? I mean, I work with product teams who do everything from B2B SaaS collaboration tools, very similar to ProdPad, versus, all the way to companies who work on hardware solutions for, I'm working in the R&D space for everything from sport to aerotech. The measures are going to be completely different. The way that you think about things are going to be completely different. So there's no one thing. There's no one thing that you look at. It's context specific. See, that's why you need to look at what's important to the business. What's our context? What's our strategy? And therefore, based on, the hypothesis that we're setting, we think that if we do this, we're going to be able to move on to this sort of area. And if we do this, this will allow us to move on to this area. Cool. Well, you're setting hypotheses here. How do you know whether you're right or not? What are you going to measure for that particular thing? And so if you're in a SaaS business, that might be net revenue retention. But if you're in a hardware business, that could be completely different things that, frankly, I don't even know how to measure because I'm not in that space nearly as much.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm a little bit more in the SaaS space. Can we speak to SaaS just a tad? You talked about revenue retention. Before that, speak a little bit. Like I think beforehand when we were conversating, you mentioned a pricing experiment that you had recently done. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to give some context on this, I'm not the one who got these stats, but I've definitely seen them bandied around, and I found them really interesting around how little teams iterate on their pricing. I mean, to the point where it's like, on average, I think it was something like, SaaS companies change their pricing like 3 times in their lifetime. And I'm like, oh my God, that's not nearly enough. Now we've done considerably more changes than that, but probably not enough changes still, right? And I'll still say that I don't think we've nailed our pricing, right? But we have iterated on it more than certainly other companies have. The reason why I think iterating on pricing is important is because it's another lever that can make a massive difference to whether you are, showing the value of your product, leaving money on the table when people are taking a look at your product or not, and attracting the right types of users. When we launched ProdPad, we were a category creator, and so we had nothing to compare to, and so we came up with a base price. We're like, I don't know how much we could charge for this. What's a good price? $25? $25. That's what Basecamp is charging. That's kind of who was popular back then. So Basecamp's $25. We'll charge $25. Cool. Put the price on it, and we started getting some sales. Works for us. And then we did the whole thing of building out into the, everyone knows it as the good, better, best pricing, the 3 tiers. And good, better, best took us for quite a ways, right? But the problem with good, better, best is that you kind of end up creating 3 compromised packages, and they end up being a good fit for 3 fictional ideal customers that aren't necessarily a perfect fit. And so you end up with people going, oh, I really want the middle package, but I want this thing from the higher package here. Right? And so it's never quite the ideal fit. And we ended up having lots of back and forth discussions and never quite getting the right fit with those. And so we ended up moving towards, and again, after a lot of iteration and a lot of testing and discovery work on this, moving towards a more, not quite usage-based, but user and value-based pricing, which is based on the modules that you use and the number of users that you use. So you never get charged for any part of ProdPad that you're not actually using, and you only ever get charged for the users who are making use of it. And we only ever charge for the editors who are making use of it. So if you've got product people using it, great. The rest of your team are absolutely free. And if you're only using it for road mapping and idea management, cool, great. We'll only charge you for those parts. You can add on feedback management later, right? And there's other factors that you can consider with that. But for the most part, we've kept it really, really simple with modules and number of users.
In pricing experimentation, you mentioned good, better, best, usage. Another level is your trials, our freemium type strategies. What has your experience been with trial conversions, freemium? Like what kind of experiments have you ran there?
Yeah. Again, probably not enough. We would actually like to do more with this. So, very, very early days of ProdPad, we didn't have, well, we did have a free trial, but you had to put a credit card on it. And this was only for a technical reason because myself and my co-founder, we were hacking away ourselves and couldn't figure out a way to do the free trial, no credit card activation type thing. And no surprise, no one was buying this thing because who would put down their credit card for a tool that was obviously hacked together in a couple weeks? So we eventually upgraded a few things, made it look better, and opened it up so that you could have a free trial and then put your credit card in later, like you get with most other SaaS businesses of that sort of ilk. And that's what's brought us through to today. You get a free trial, no credit card required. Thing that we have iterated on was the length of trial. So we actually realized early on that the trial time was something that we could play with. So when we first put this new trial out there, we made it 30 days. Why? Because that's what other trials were like. Basecamp had a free 30-day trial and, it kind of seemed like the norm. And so 30-day free trial. But we looked at the data and we realized that we could tell with 85% certainty by day 9 who was going to buy or not, just based on their usage. People who were going to buy would, frankly, they'd be using the app, right? They would have added their product and they would have added a few ideas and invited somebody and set up their first integration and some other key things. And people who weren't going to buy hadn't done this stuff. And we're like, oh, okay. So why are we giving them all this extra time to just sit around and not pay? And, is there anything we can do to get these people who haven't done these actions to do these actions? So what we realized, we could cut the trial time down. We cut it in half and our trial time went up. And then we realized if we cut it down even more, we cut it down to 7 days, but gave people the option to add more trial time because this became a request. They wanted more trial time. And so we said, well, you can add trial time by doing stuff. So add a product, get an extra couple days. Add an idea, get an extra couple days added to your trial. Invite a colleague, here's some more time. Do these key actions that we know lead you to learn how to use the app. And as we're doing it, it's got little walkthroughs being like, hey, you've added an idea. This is what you're doing. This is why it's good for you. So they're training themselves how to use the product, but they're making themselves more successful and therefore more likely to buy the product. And so people would get everything done in 7 days because urgency would be created. You've only got 7 days. You got this week to do it. So if you don't do it, you better do it. But then they would be able to have that extra time because they sometimes needed more time to get the rest of the team on board and get their boss to give them their credit card and all that other stuff. But they would use the app really well in that period. And by doing these experiments, we brought our trial time up our conversion rate up by 4x.
Wow, that's incredible. And what's great about your example is in the very beginning, I asked of a question around how a product manager could use data. And you looked at the data, figured out that it was a 9-day mark. And then I love how you gamified it and started almost like a relationship between me and the software, to get the time that I needed. Before we move on in experimentation and usage and data, with larger teams, because you mentioned editors, like if there were a number of product managers or leaders or people who are going to be editors, how do you think about multi-user pricing and usage? Because you said it's based on seats and modules. Is it a straight line, or have you experimented with that at all of how you think about the team-based pricing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a straight line based on product managers to a point. We offer discount pricing as you move into bulk enterprise prices.
Okay. So that's good. Another thing with the product, and I mean, this is a question for everybody. I want to ask your view of putting AI into the product, token management, large language models, and then we will go to, if we can, how is AI changing the position? Because you mentioned some of the junior level things can be done, but a lot of those are being done inside of the tool. So there's a couple things there to kind of unpack, but how are you approaching for yourself in your business? What is your AI journey for the product?
Yeah, absolutely. So AI has been really exciting because it's unlocking what we've envisioned for ProdPad from early days. You can see videos of me talking about the future of product management going back 10 years ago, where I'm eerily spelling out what we're doing now. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. We had AI stuff in ProdPad before it was cool, right? We had deduplication and matching more than 5 years ago. We had an AI chat bot that you could talk to, and it would tell you insights about your feedback. This was in 2021. This was years before ChatGPT. Unfortunately, it was named Dotbot and it was badly branded and it never took off, and it was kind of limited just to the feedback section. And it was nothing quite like ChatGPT is today. Obviously, it's now much more verbose and intelligible and conversational now. But back then, it was really impressive being able to say, "Hey, well, what are our customers asking about? What's frustrating them the most?" And it would have an answer that was actually based on what was in your feedback. So very cool to be at the forefront of that. But as we've been working with GPT since before, the 3.54 stuff landed, we got early access. And so we've been building in some really interesting stuff, some promptless AI since day one. And so, we managed to get in things like, you got an idea just on a sticky note somewhere. Let's take that and flesh it out into the rest of the idea. Now let's press a button and have it write your user stories. You want it to write it in jobs to be done or, Gherkin format? No problem. It can do that. But not just write your stuff, generate stuff. Let's also use it as a sidekick so it can judge as to whether this idea you've written actually matches what's going on in your roadmap and your vision. Is this idea any good? It can give you constructive feedback and point you in the right direction. And then the latest thing that we've been doing is basically creating a tool that allows you, Copilot in ProdPad, allows you to talk to it, have conversations, ask it questions about best practice, ask it questions about your entire roadmap, your backlog, say things like, "Hey, could you summarize all the feedback from, the last week?" Cool. Now, can you tell me if anything like that lines up with what's going on in my roadmap? Cool. I've got an idea based on that. Can you help me flesh it out? Yeah, cool. Now it'll say, "Do you want me to add that to your backlog?" Sure, thanks. And so you basically have this whole back and forth with this thing, and it's taking actions on your behalf in your ProdPad account. So it knows what's going on in your ProdPad account. It knows good product management. It knows what you're trying to achieve. It's basically like having a product colleague that you can bounce ideas off of while it does your work for you, so that you as a product person can spend more time getting out there talking to, the stakeholders that matter, like your execs, like your customers, like the rest of your team.
So where does that leave the future role of a product leader if you now have a sidekick, a co-pilot, a colleague that you can leverage and interact with, frees up time? How does that change the role when we're looking to the future?
Yeah, so I think down the line, and I don't mean too far away, I think every knowledge worker is going to have a set of sidekicks and co-pilots and AI colleagues that are going to help them out with various tasks like this, right? And what that's going to enable is that it's going to allow teams to scale, right? So you won't necessarily need to have as many as much time spent looking through the feedback that you get from your sales team, or, you won't have to have product managers on hand to answer all the questions coming in from, salespeople or from your customers or from wherever, right? They're actually spending their time looking at the output from this AI friend who's sitting there doing the hard work for them, saying, hey, look, I've been listening in while you've been off actually, spending time in meetings and unblocking things and doing the stuff that I can't. And here's what's been flagged up, right? So your roadmap says this, but the customers have been asking for this in the last week. Do you want me to do something with this? And so it allows the product team to do more with it, right? So they're now coming into what they're doing more informed, and they're actually able to spend time doing the important stuff, because there's still going to be work to be done around unblocking stuff, asking the right questions, making sure that they're solving the right problems for the business. I think about this in the in the way that if a product manager's job is to create something that is technically feasible and desirable for the customer and usable, and AI is taken over, right? Well, AI is really good at generating stuff that is technically feasible, right? Press a button and it can make apps for you, right? I imagine a future when you're using ProdPad and you're not taking the specs that you're writing and sending them to development, but you're actually sending it to production, right? Why not? At some point in time, that'll be there. Making something usable, again, that's not hard to do. We're not there yet with no code tools. Right now, they're kind of junk, but give it some time, give it a few more cycles, and they will be making more usable tools. And honestly, usability is a function of making it not surprising. You don't want something that adds new surprising ways to log in, for example. It should copy how it's been done for everybody else. And AI is good at copying everybody else and making it the same. And so as a product manager, being able to say, hey, you know what, can you build me a login page for my app? As a product manager 20 years ago, we had to write big, long specs and then manage this whole process of getting this thing out the door. And a product manager in 20 years from now would basically just be able to do that by voice. Say, hey, I've got an idea. Can you just make me a login page or a profile page? Or can you add tags that I can filter by? And it'll make it just like how everyone else's work, because it's the predictable stuff. Now, where product managers can spend their time is on the stuff that delights, that adds value. And product managers will be the people who figure out what that value is, right? That 1% or whatever percent it is of your product that adds value, that makes it different from all the other apps, right? Because yes, there is this whole thing of all the apps in the world kind of look the same. And that's actually probably not a bad thing. It's that each of those different apps out there, they each do something different, which is why we use them. So what is the thing that makes your app special, or this other new app special? It does something slightly different. So what is it? And product people are going to be the ones to figure out what that is. And so, make an app that does 90% of the same thing, but now let's design what this thing is here. And that's going to have to be not handcrafted, but you're certainly going to have to discover that by talking to humans, by understanding the market, by doing something that the machine can't.
Right. By definition, we'll close on that, but you're exactly right, because what AI will give you is the 90% that everybody else already has figured out. It cannot do anything but that. That's how the large language model works. It's built on averages and total knowledge and probabilities. So yeah, if you let AI write your code and build your app, it's not going to be unique. It's not going to be different. So the very nature of it. This has been great. Thank you for being here today and covering what I think was a lot of different topics, rapid fire. So I enjoyed the conversation. I hope listeners do too. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise and knowledge.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay. Thank you.